Esther had always been full of stories. She was the girl who found hidden kingdoms in dusty corners, who spun tales of rolling green meadows where she could run free, or grand libraries filled with talking books. Yet her life in the Little Hearth Orphanage was anything but storybook. Days began at dawn with the clamorous ring of the old brass bell, reminding the children it was time to line up for chores. The orphanage steward, Mrs. Primble, paced the halls at daybreak to ensure every bed was made and every shoe polished. For as long as Esther could remember, she had awakened to the hum of half-professed whispers in the dormitory and the faint, musty smell of aging wood. She had grown accustomed to the hush that settled over nearly everything in that place. Though the building was worn its floors screeching with every step, its windows smudged from decades of negligence, it was still the only home Esther had ever really known. In the evenings, when the other orphans pulled out tattered board games or played half-hearted rounds of hide and seek, she would sit by the single window in her bunk room and stare at the night sky's brilliant glow. Before drifting off to sleep, she would tell herself the same wish she had been voicing for years. I wish for love to find me so I can belong somewhere that feels like home. But typically, the black sky remained silent, offering no tangible response. One crisp autumn morning, after Esther had finished her chores and chores were being checked by Mrs. Primble, the young girl found herself free for an hour before lunch. Autumn was her favorite season. She loved how the red and gold leaves seemed to swirl like dancers in the orchard behind the orphanage. On a whim, she snuck out through a seldom used side door into the orchard. A stony path led toward a small, abandoned shed she had explored countless times. Usually, there was nothing to see beyond dust-laden shelves, cracked glass, and a nest of timid mice in the corner. But on this day, as a ray of sunshine pierced through the dusty window, something glimmered beneath an overturned crate. Esther leaned in. Beneath the crate was an old metal trunk, rusted around the edges but still intact. She tugged at it, excited by the prospect of uncovering forgotten treasures. Despite the rust, the trunk opened more easily than she expected, its hinges creating a groaning squeak that resonated throughout the shed. Inside were a few brittle sheets of paper, a child's leather shoe, the mate missing, and a thick notebook with a cover that shimmered like morning dew. The notebook looked both ancient and strangely new, as though it had never been touched. Its cover was a soft turquoise, embossed with a pattern of tiny hearts, and there, right in the center, etched in flowing gold script, was a single word, right. A warm pulse, almost like a tiny heartbeat, seemed to emanate through Esther's hands when she picked it up, sending a thrill through her body. She held her breath. Could it be magic? It felt alive. Cautiously, she turned the first page. It was blank except for one sentence in golden ink. Words that spark love become miracles in the world. Leaning closer, she read those words 3 times, trying to untangle their meaning. She ran her fingertips across the page, noting how the letters seemed to glow under her touch, as if encouraging her to try something. Shaking with excitement, she closed the book and glanced around the shed, making sure she wasn't being watched. She tucked the notebook under her coat and slid back into the orphanage, just in time to hear Mrs. Primble shout, "Children, line up for lunch!" Despite the clatter of utensils and the gentle hush that fell over the dining hall, Esther could scarcely focus on her meal. Her heart pounded at the thought of the curious statement in the notebook. She recited it in her head. Words that spark love become miracles in the world. She decided she had to test it, though a tiny voice in her head wondered if her imagination was simply running wild. That evening, after completing the usual chores and tucking herself into bed, Esther carefully lifted the notebook from under her pillow. She waited until all the other children drifted into slumber. The only light was the feeble moonlight seeping through a gap in the old window's curtains. With shaky hands, she opened the cover, flipped to a blank page, and pressed her pen against the paper. She wrote one sentence. I wish someone would share a comforting hug with me tomorrow. Even writing those words caused her heart to ache a little, reminding her of her loneliness. Love was a foreign concept in the orphanage. The younger children might receive a pat on the head, or the older ones might give awkward half hugs. But real warmth, Genuine affection? That was a rarity. Yet, the book's promise flashed across her mind, and she let herself believe that something might change. The following day, the orphanage was bustling. Mrs. Primble was expecting a visiting family interested in adopting, and which meant the hectic process of tidying the halls, corralling the children, and trying to present the orphanage in its finest light. Esther found a spurt of energy in the warm sunlight streaming through the windows, though she couldn't say why her existence was the same as always, with no real promise of special attention. Yet, as she lined up for lunch, she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. Turning around, she saw a younger girl, Harriet, who was about 7 and newly arrived at Little Hearth. Harriet's big, round eyes brimmed with tears. She'd lost her only doll, Harriet explained, and while searching under the bunk beds, another child had made fun of her. I just, I just miss my family, she whispered. Esther's chest constricted with empathy. Without thinking, she wrapped her arms around the smaller girl. She held Harriet close, whispering comfort, letting the child's tears fall gently on her shirt. She realized she was giving a hug rather than receiving one, but the exchange still felt wonderful. There was a softness in Harriet's eyes afterward that stirred something inside Esther's heart. Ever so silently, a second presence entered the hallway. One of the older boys, Thomas, had paused to watch them. He placed a gentle hand on Esther's shoulder and looked at her with a rare touch of kindness. "You're good with her," he said. And then, unexpectedly, he pulled Esther in for a quick, shy hug. It was an awkward, big brotherly gesture, and it ended almost as soon as it began. But in that fleeting moment, Esther felt a bloom of warmth she had never known before. It was more than just a comforting gesture. It felt like a miracle. Her heart leapt. The words in the notebook had proven themselves in a roundabout, beautiful way. Excitement coursed through her that night, and once again she took the notebook from under her pillow, opening it to a fresh page. A faint luminescence greeted her, as if the paper remembered the magic from the night before. This time she crafted a longer wish. I wish that the new younger children wouldn't feel so lonely. Let them find small surprises of kindness. Carefully, she closed the notebook, pressing her palm against the cover as though sealing the magic in place. Over the next week, a series of uncanny events startled the orphanage. A timid boy found a freshly mended coat on his bunk. No one confessed to sewing it. Another discovered her hair ribbons replaced with new ones in brilliant rainbow colors that gave her confidence until she smiled more bravely at everyone. Harriet found her lost doll perched in a window, wearing a crochet blanket around its shoulders that someone must have carefully stitched during the night. These acts of kindness appeared from unknown sources, but the children blossomed with gratitude. Esther could hardly contain her wonder. It was all connected to her second entry in the notebook, she felt sure of it. Still, she kept silent. A jolt of fear told her to guard the secret. Magic, after all, might be taken away if too many eyes peered into its mystery. She considered telling Harriet or Thomas, yet every time she tried to bring it up, her voice caught in her throat. A part of her also wondered, what if people thought she was making it up? She could almost hear Mrs. Primble's stony voice scolding her for indulging in fantasies when she should focus on chores. No, it was best to keep the notebook hidden. One breezy evening, the wind whipped through the orchard trees, scattering leaves into a coppery swirl. Esther slipped outside with the notebook tucked under her sweater. She had begun to treat each writing session like a sacred ritual, needing a patch of quiet, open air to focus her heart and mind. She sank to the ground under a nearly bare apple tree, the earth softened by fallen leaves, and opened the turquoise cover. By now, she had learned an odd phenomenon. The page glowed only when she had a wish that flowed purely from love, not simple curiosity or mischief. So she took a moment to concentrate. At last, she wrote, I want Mrs. Primble to remember kindness and show it more often. More than using her name, she included a broader desire for the orphanage caretaker to experience some warmth. Though she could seem stern, Esther sensed that the older woman was lonely too, sealed off in a fortress of rules. If Mrs. Primble discovered a bit of love, maybe that love would ripple through the entire orphanage. In the weeks that followed, Mrs. Primble became noticeably gentler. She still clapped her hands for attention when the children were too rowdy, but her scolding softened to mild admonitions. Once, Esther caught her humming while tidying the reading nook. Another time, she organized an impromptu craft hour, showing the children how to make paper flowers out of leftover scraps. This small act of creativity brought a swirl of color into the orphanage and an unfamiliar sparkle into Mrs. Primple's eyes. The older children exchanged puzzled looks. Had something come over her? Esther simply smiled, thinking of the quiet orchard and the notebook's magic. But every miracle seemed to raise the question of how far to push it. Could the notebook do more? Esther felt an ache in her chest each time she thought about families coming to the orphanage for adoption. She had watched a handful of children find new homes over the years. She yearned to experience that moment when someone looked at her and said, "We choose you. We love you." Yet an uncanny sense of hesitation clung to the idea of using the notebook for her own adoption wish. It seemed it would be a massive request, more than just a comforting hug or an anonymous act of kindness. But the longing would not subside. During a cold afternoon in early winter, when the sky was heavy with a grayish gloom, Esther went outside to the orchard again. The old apple tree stood bare now, its branches spindly, as though reaching for something out of grasp. Esther placed the open notebook upon her lap, pen trembling in her fingers. She breathed in sharply, seeking the right words. She wrote, "I wish for a loving family to find me, a family that sees me for who I truly am and wants me in their life forever." Even before she finished the sentence, tears blurred her vision. She pressed her hand against the page, and it glowed with an intensity she had never seen before. A rush of cold air whipped her hair across her face, but her heart felt ablaze with hope. By evening, a deep anxiety set in. She couldn't help doubting the notebook's power. Perhaps she'd grown greedy by asking for something so big. The next few days went by in a swirl of chores and routine, with no sign of visitors set on adopting. She tried to recount the miracles that had already happened, reminding herself that small seeds of love can take time to bloom. But her chest felt tight, as if weighted by her hopes and fears. In late December, the first snow dusted the orphanage courtyard. The children shrieked in excitement, running out to build lopsided snowmen. Esther joined for a while, but her thoughts kept drifting. She was about to return inside for some hot cocoa when she heard the creak of carriage wheels. The orphanage was in an older part of town, reliant on horse-drawn carriages for certain deliveries and the churn of a small automobile engine. Two vehicles had pulled up together, carrying donors who brought special holiday gifts for the orphans. Mrs. Primble shepherded everyone into the common room, offering the visitors warm smiles. A tall, kindly gentleman with silver hair introduced himself as Mr. Fletcher. He handed out small boxes of chocolates and gingerbread cookies. "Just little tokens of the season," he said with a laugh that made his shoulders shake. By his side was a petite woman, presumably his wife, with soft brown curls that framed her gentle face. The other visitors scattered around, but Esther's eyes kept returning to the Fletchers, drawn to their warmth. As the children unwrapped cookies, Harriet nibbled one, shaped like a tiny reindeer, and beamed. Mr. Fletcher asked if they could chat with some of the older kids about their interests. Mrs. Primble obliged, leading them to a side room. Esther's stomach did a somersault. She combed a few stray locks of hair behind her ears, suddenly conscious of how her dress had a patch where it was once torn. Soon, she found herself seated across from the Fletchers, a small plate of cookies on the table between them. The woman, Mrs. Fletcher, spoke in a soft, comforting tone. "What do you like to do, Esther?" Esther swallowed nervously. I love to write and read. I like telling stories. It makes me happy to imagine new worlds and share them with people." A gentle light filled Mr. Fletcher's eyes. "Do you like exploring too? I've always been fond of small adventures, wandering through forests or rummaging through old attics for hidden treasures." Esther couldn't help but grin at that. "Yes, I do. It's been my dream to discover something magical one day." Mrs. Fletcher laughed kindly. "Well, you never know where magic might be hiding." The exchange was brief but felt remarkably intimate. a fragile seed of possibility stirred in the back of Esther's mind. Over the next few weeks, the Fletchers visited again, bringing small gifts for everyone, not just Esther. They helped Thomas fix a squeaky stool in the art room, and even joined Harriet in building a sturdier dollhouse. Yet every time they spoke with Esther, there was a spark of genuine interest in their eyes, a connection that made her heart flutter with anticipation. One late afternoon, as the sky glowed orange with the winter sunset, Esther watched Mr. and Mrs. Fletcher from a distance. They were speaking with Mrs. Primble in hushed, serious tones. Esther dared hope they were discussing an adoption. She clutched the notebook in her hands, pressing it close to her chest, silently replaying the wish she'd written. Breathless, she rushed upstairs to the dormitory to wait, refusing to let the rolling anxiety swallow her. Minutes seemed like hours. Eventually, Mrs. Primble came to fetch her. "Come, Esther," she said, her voice softer than usual. "We have some important news." Esther followed her to the office, her pulse hammering so loudly she could hardly hear her own footsteps. She entered and found the Fletchers there, smiling with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Esther could feel her legs trembling. As soon as she crossed the threshold, Miss Fletcher rushed forward and knelt so they could be at eye level. "We've been speaking with Mrs. Primble about adopting an older child," she began softly, "and, well, there's something very special about you. We certainly love visiting all the children here, but we keep coming back to you. We would be honored if you would consider joining our family." Esther's heart felt like it soared into the clouds. Tears glimmered in her eyes. She could scarcely form words, so she simply nodded, stepping into their warm embrace. In that moment, the only sound was the quiet sniffle of Mrs. Primble, who discreetly dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. There, in the cozy office, with faint lamplight dancing against the walls, a miracle of love unfurled. Esther felt an immense sense of gratitude to the Fletchers and to the magical notebook that had brought this possibility to life. In the following days, as paperwork proceeded, the orphanage bustled with excitement. Harriet painted a farewell card. Thomas tried to hide his sadness at losing his friend, but offered a handshake that turned into a hug. Even Mrs. Primble confided in Esther quietly, "I never thought I'd see a young one leave us with so much compassion in her eyes. You'll do great things, child." The older woman's usual sternness cracked just for a moment, offering a glimpse of real affection. Esther's last evening at the orphanage was spent packing her few possessions. A couple of dresses, a threadbare teddy bear Harriet insisted she keep, and of course, the turquoise notebook. She ran her fingers over its embossed cover, thinking of all the small wonders it had worked. She wondered if the magic notebook would remain powerful even after she left this place. Would it continue to shape love in her new home? At dawn, Mr. and Mrs. Fletcher arrived in a small car to take her to her new residence. The other children gathered at the door for a final farewell, hugging Esther and promising to write letters. Esther's chest felt near to bursting, a swirl of excitement, nervousness, and sadness. She waved to everyone as the car pulled away, the orphanage's old sign, Little Hearth, growing smaller in the distance. She did feel an odd tug at her heart, as though a chapter of her life was closing behind her like a gently locked door. Her new home was a charming cottage overlooking a gentle lake. Together, her new parents guided her through each room. They introduced her to a cheerful yellow kitchen where they'd share home-cooked meals, a snug living room with a fireplace that crackled invitingly, and a modest but cozy bedroom they had decorated with pastel curtains and patterned quilts. Esther immediately imagined how lovely it would be to read by the window, with sunlight spilling in, or to write for hours at the little wooden desk. She pressed the notebook protectively against her chest, silently sending a thank you to whichever mysterious force had conspired to bring her here. That night, while her new parents tidied up dishes from dinner, Esther snuck upstairs and opened the notebook. She half expected to see words greeting her from the page, but it remained blank, softly gleaming. She felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, so she wrote, "Thank you for allowing me to find a family who loves me." The page glowed as her pen scratched out the words. This time, instead of entire events unfolding, a gentle warmth radiated from the notebook, as if it were reciprocating her thanks. Days turned into weeks, and Esther discovered that love wasn't just about grand gestures, it lived in the small, everyday kindnesses. Mr. Fletcher helped her build a birdhouse outside the cottage window, and every morning they watched the sparrows and finches flutter in. Mrs. Fletcher taught her how to bake bread. She laughed when flour dusted Esther's nose, and the scent filled their home with a sense of safety and belonging. At the end of each day, Esther would open the notebook and describe the moments that made her heart swell. Harriet's letter from the orphanage, Mrs. Primble's surprising note of well wishes, Thomas's improvement in woodwork, the graciousness of her new parents. On the page, she sometimes added small wishes for others: a neighbor's ill grandmother to recover, a lonely crossing guard to feel appreciated. Warm signs of love kept appearing one by one. A cluster of get well cards for the grandmother left mysteriously in her mailbox, or a comforting wave offered to the crossing guard every morning by school children who used to rush by without noticing him. As winter blossomed into spring, Esther grew more confident in her new life. One balmy Friday afternoon, she saw her parents waiting for her outside her classroom. Once in a while, they would pick her up to have a special outing together, maybe hot chocolate or a walk around the lake. But on this particular day, they showed up with unusual excitement dancing in their eyes. "We want to take you someplace special," Mrs. Fletcher explained, and Mr. Fletcher simply winked. In the car, Esther's mind raced with questions until they pulled up in front of a tranquil cemetery, its gates iron wrought and overgrown with wild roses. She looked curiously between her parents, feeling uncertain. "We found information about your birth mother," Mr. Fletcher explained gently. "We thought you might want to visit her grave. We didn't want to tell you until we were sure, but yes, she rests here, and we want to give you a moment so you can share your life with her in your own way." Esther swallowed hard. She had never known her birth mother. No records had been passed to her at the orphanage beyond a vague suggestion that she was very young and without resources. Entering the cemetery, she felt her legs shake with a mix of eagerness and apprehension. They walked a winding path until they paused at a modest headstone with her mother's name etched in gentle lettering. Esther knelt, tears forming in her eyes. She placed a trembling hand on the gravestone. "Mama," she whispered, though it felt odd to address a woman she'd never met. I am safe now. I have a family. They're wonderful and they love me. I wish I could tell you how grateful I am for my life." For a moment, she wondered if the notebook and her mother were connected, if somehow this enchantment had been her mother's final gift. Or maybe it was just a cosmic miracle, a puzzle she might never fully solve. Yet deep down, she sensed that love was the singular magic holding everything together. She shut her eyes, letting tears flow freely, and felt warm arms around her. Murmur. Fletcher and Mrs. Fletcher, quietly comforting her in that sacred space. Even amid sorrow, love found a way to cradle her heart. Back home, Esther climbed up to her room and, with quivering hands, took out the notebook. She had so much swirling in her soul: gratitude, sorrow, wonder. She opened to a blank page and contemplated what to write. This time, it didn't feel like a request. Instead, it felt like a testimony of what she had learned. Slowly, she wrote, "Love transcends every boundary, and miracles dwell in open hearts." The page shimmered in agreement. In that moment, she realized she didn't need to hide her treasure anymore, nor fear losing its magic. She understood that the love she poured out on those pages was already within her, that it kindled compassion and warmth in everyone around her. The notebook was simply a gentle nudge, a tool that reminded her of the incredible power in each kind word, each caring thought. Indeed, as she leaned back and looked upon her new life, she realized that the greatest miracle was the awakening of love itself, in her heart and in the world around her. A love that would continue sparking small wonders, wherever and whenever it was freely shared. She pressed the notebook to her chest, whispering a final thank you. She would keep writing, keep hoping, keep believing in the power of goodness. The orchard at Little Hearth was far away now, but that orchard of hopeful seeds still lived in her mind. With each new day, she would plant new words, sprinkle them with love, and watch them blossom into miracles. And as for her story, it was only beginning.